So it looks like people have a real mix of stuff that they've got at home. Guys, if you just arrived, please make sure you're set to all panelists in attendees. And then also pop in the chat box what equipment you're working with at home right now. I would kill for a pull-up bar at the moment. I've been using my steps, and they're carpeted, and gripping onto the carpet on the staircase is terrible on the grip.
You got to get those rock climber fingertips.
Yep. Gonna have Popeye forearms by the end of this. All right, guys, so we're going to dive into it. So Carl is going to be leading this conversation to start us off. He's going to be talking about OPEX gain or resistance training or strength training, whatever you want to call it at home. Obviously something that all want to continue to do and want to program for our clients. We just have to get a little bit creative around the way we're doing it. I know he's going to dig into some of the important principles around OPEX and then talk a little bit more detailed about how to put them into practice. So Carl, I'll pass it to you, and it looks like James popped in as well to join us.
Cool. I apologize if I'm breaking up. I'm plugged in, but internet in Arizona is going down right now, I think. Yeah, so just to go back to where we left the conversation yesterday on OPEX gain, pain, and sustain. Today we're talking about OPEX gain relative to resistance training. And the way that we built this conversation out, guys, is it's killing Carl. That's true, Jim. The way that we built this out is the assumption that we don't have any equipment, because I know that we have clients out there, and some of you guys as coaches out there are putting together training programs and stuff like that, and you guys don't have any equipment at your fingertips and you have to get creative. So we built this presentation or this conversation out based on you guys not having access to equipment. And also just want to hit on, the idea that if you have clients where you had this grandiose 6-week awesome training cycle that you guys were executing on a few weeks ago, don't get too caught up in trying to continue that phase, right? Like, you're not replacing cluster back squats with tempo air squats, right? Like the contraction is just different. So don't try to stay aligned there, and keep this thing really simple, right? So the things that we talk about today aren't going to be too nuanced. Everything's going to be based upon, the principles that we're proposing, and everything's going to be based on simplicity. So we can take these principles and use them with all of our clients across the board. Yeah, so this is a deep one, and I'd love for James to jump in after I hit the first point here. But when we look at why are we doing resistance training? So if we look at one of the main considerations, that's going to be adaptation, right? And that can be a really long conversation, but let's look at performing a movement, tissue breaking down, and then adaptation occurring. Let's keep it that simple when talking about adaptation today relative to resistance training, mostly body weight resistance training. And then you guys can see all of the other things that we can consider when looking at the benefits of resistance training. But on top of the adaptation piece, James, do you have anything to add to why resistance training and why that's important right now?
No, not a lengthy one. That's a little bit more outside of the intentions. I think I'd like to spend time when you feel is appropriate on the intentions of gain.
Yeah, I think right now would be great. Okay. before we jump into progression. Okay,
sure. Yeah. I think we have to remember that, we're doing weight training and being in the gym is a diversion tactic. Okay, so we don't need to do bicep curls to actually live and reproduce and survive today. And people need to get on with that first in order to recognize the purpose around gain. Okay. Because where we've been lost for the past 30 years or so is that everything that's been wrapped around gain is largely for getting huge and looking good naked, or lifting a house, or preventing disease. This doesn't make gain not important for those things, but the intentions are all incorrect as to how we practice it. Instead, intentions inside a gain should be you give yourself a physical challenge with mechanical limitations being the major constraint that's slightly in front of what you're capable of. And if people do that with physical challenges, with contractions, that we philosophically believe should be patterns of movement, we can get into that conversation if we want, then that's what people should approach with doing gain. You should do gain to get a physical, mechanical challenge that's slightly harder than what you're currently capable of expressing. And it should honestly end there. Now, when it gets into sport, looking good on stage in 6 months at 2% body fat, those are definitely different routes of approach for why you should do gain and how to do that. But in these times and what we're talking about today, I would just say, get up to speed on asking the real question as to why you should do it in the first place. And then we can start talking about the outcomes that you get from gain.
Thanks for that, James. Carl, anything else to add on the why?
No, I think that was beautifully said. But I do want to go back to understanding what you're trying to get and what kind of response you're trying to get for your at-home resistance training, because I think some coaches can get caught up in, we were doing this last week and I want to continue to do this, or I'm just putting a bunch of things on paper or in TrueCoach because I need to give my client exercise, right? And when we go to the next slide and start talking about progressions, we'll talk about, laying a framework and proposing what our framework is and what progression should look like within OPEX gain. So just looking at where we start and where we quote unquote finish, right? Like James said, we should be prescribing resistance training or OPEX gain based upon movement patterns, right? So what we laid out today is the squat pattern specifically. So think about your clients starting with motor control activities. Think about motor control activities as very slow or controlled or very little complexity in that movement. So relative to the squat, look at the air squat as a starting point for the squat pattern. So in motor control, imagine giving your clients an air squat, 5 reps at a 3-second down tempo and a 1-second up tempo, right? Can they perform those reps efficiently and effectively, right? If they can, that's something, that movement can go inside of your OPEX gain resistance training program for your clients when you're designing this stuff at home for them, right? And now we move to strength endurance. What does strength endurance mean, right? So we've checked the box on motor control in the squat pattern. Now we're looking at strength endurance. Let's look at doing a lot more reps, right? So here, what we laid out as an FME, or let's call them tests over time, is we're testing the air squat, then we're testing the goblet squat, and then we're testing 1-rep maxes, right? You see a big X through maximum contractions, because if your client doesn't have the ability to add great amounts of external load, you're probably not performing maximum contractions during this time, right? So as an easy framework of what your client should do in a progressive model, let's look at starting with motor control, training a lot of motor control, stacking on strength endurance, right? So we can still perform motor control activities and strength endurance activities in at-home training programs, right? And just that's what they get, right? And now when we start talking about how we can progress those things, that's a very nuanced conversation that we'll try to answer that question today on different ways to progress. So progression considerations. So we can look at a few different things, right? It's like we don't have a bunch of external load right now, right? So how do I progress my client to keep gathering an adaptation over time, right? Because we may have clients that we're utilizing a jump rope and a sandbag that's only 30 pounds for 8 weeks, and we have to get creative in how we still have progression in exercise. So consider increasing volume, right? So if you're doing, 10 reps times 4 sets this week, are you doing 10 reps times 5 sets next week? Or are you doing 12 reps times 4 sets next week? So consider increasing reps or sets per week. Are we increasing intensity, right? This is a very tough one right now if we don't have external load, but we can always find ways to add external loads and increase that load per week, right? So if you're doing the air squat and motor control, right, and you eventually get to strength endurance with your clients and you want to perform 12 to 15 reps with added load, think about grabbing a suitcase, right? Grab a backpack, put some weights there, right? Like we can emulate a goblet squat by holding a suitcase out in front of us. Like we can get really creative with odd objects in any pattern of movement, not just the squat. So are we manipulating time under tension, right? So if we're increasing time under tension, we're probably not adding load, right? So think about doing an air squat at 3-0-1-0 week 1, and then week 2 we're 4-0-1-0 with the same amount of sets and the same amount of reps. So in that progressive model, all we're doing is we're increasing time under tension, utilizing the exact same exercise selection. Another thing that we can look at is decreasing time under tension if we're manipulating intensity. So I don't want to go from a 4-0-1-0 week 1 with 10 reps, and then week 2 go to a 3-0-1-0 with the same 10 reps. That doesn't make any sense because I'm decreasing time under tension and I'm not adding any increased load. So think about how you can manipulate time under tension as a progressive mechanism. And then the last thing I want to hit on when talking about progression considerations is going from simple to complex in exercise selection. To keep this extremely simple, imagine taking someone from ground zero, right? Like they've never done an upper body push movement in their entire life. You start them with doing a front leaning rest or an FLR for X amount of weeks. That eventually turns into a push-up. That eventually turns into a decline push-up. That eventually turns into a one-arm push-up, right? And we can kind of extend that out. And that's just an example of how we can take one movement pattern or one exercise, and we can progress that from a simple exercise to a more complex exercise. We don't have to completely change exercise selection every week, right? Like we only have so many exercises that are going to be in our back pocket with a given client. Because if a client's a beginner, their exercise, the tools or their exercise selection options that you have is like this big, right? You have someone more advanced, it's like, okay, I can do anything with this person. I can do some handstand walking. I can do some handstand push-ups. I can do one arm push. Like, you can do anything, right? But if you have a beginner client, make sure that you don't progress them through this model of simple to complex way too quickly.
Carl, thanks so much for hitting on those progression considerations. I think that's really helpful to lay them out like that. I do want to ask a few specific questions and would love if anyone else wants to pop any in the chat box too around progression specifically. Let's start with increased volume. So how much is too much volume? Because you could, be adding 10 air squats or a set of air squats to your client's program for as long as this thing continues. But obviously there's got to be an upper limit to that. What are you looking for to make sure you're not giving them too much volume?
Yeah, I mean, what my advice on what is enough volume, right, or too much volume is to start with what can I do to progress them closer to wherever the heck you're trying to get them, right? Like if I'm looking at the air squat and I find myself progressing to 100 unbroken air squats, right? It's like, why am I doing that? You know what I mean? Like what's the reason behind doing that? You'll have a client that you think just push upper limits with the amount of volume that you're doing. you go from 20 to 25 and incapable of doing 25 reps, right? So I would just consider the individual that they're able to do and where they're seeing positive adaptations. Adaptations can be positive or negative, right? So if we start to see negative adaptations, they're not recovering from sessions, right? It's like, okay, I may be pushing the upper echelon of the volume that they can actually handle, right? So the answer, and I know you're not proposing this, Georgia, but the answer isn't always more volume.
Thanks for that, Carl. And that definitely helps. James is jumping in the chat box as well on this question. James, could you come in and tell us what you're saying?
I'm just having a happy old time just typing stuff out here. It's kind of nice being the winger. I'm never the winger, so it's good just being on the sidelines and pumping out ideas based upon that. It's much easier.
James, you missed it. When I first signed in, it said James Fitzgerald as my name. I don't know how that happened.
Maybe that was the Zoom universe trying to give you a little bit more Wi-Fi connection to help you out. No, I added some things in the chat box there. If anyone wants some ideas based upon that, if we're being very specific for the time, I'll just add a little bit of color to it. If we're at home and you don't have a lot, just remember there's some limitations to all the patterns that are involved in the body, right? It's easier to do just think of a person having some form of moderate to low level of capability to do a lunge pattern or a squatting pattern and a pushing pattern and a core pattern is probably easier to do than a pulling pattern and a bending pattern that is at the same level of challenge, right? So just think about moving your body weight in all different kinds of patterns and challenging all those different areas. And I think what's more important right now is just creating variety plus safety with the right kind of tension with your body weight and making it fun. I think if it's fun and if you hit on all the patterns and you get creative, then you can start moving out to maybe some odd objects or things that are still safe, but that you can do for a little bit of time. I've been trying to be very reductionist in the idea of giving people resistance to make them think about not only what they get from that session, but that they can grow their mind a little bit on their own too, so they can grow towards autonomy. So giving prescriptions like, just do some bending activity and like you want to do a number of reps so it feels like your muscles are working and then just stop, right? So describing it like that, of course, in more context of the exercise and what you're doing there, now you're really starting to drive this motor learning concept inside the exercise as opposed to, being adamant that they have to do 10 to 12 at 4:0, 10, et cetera. All the while, when you're prescribing that, make sure that if it's not doable for people, don't prescribe it whatsoever. But those are just things I would just add for color, for resistance against your own body weight. And the other thing I'd add to it is if you're going to prescribe it, remember this may last for 8 weeks. Gulp. So, I mean, you're 3 days in. You got to really think about overuse as well. So if you're going to be overdoing patterns that are slightly off, right? So let's just say someone has a slight right arm that's out and left arm that's in on all their push-ups. And over a period of 8 weeks, you do 6,000 push-ups and 3,000 burpees, you may now get yourself a right AC joint issue with that individual that you didn't pick up on. So that's where a variety of the movements and variety of tension with body weight could certainly help and make it enjoyable and fun. And then you may get some more from that.
Awesome. What you just hit on there, James, the notion of learning and, the idea you just mentioned of, telling people to do some bending until, they feel like they've done some good posterior chain work. It is such a beautiful moment for a coach when a client is able to take the situation, see what you've written down for them and adapt. And I know I've watched this from a couple of clients who are not coaches in any capacity over this last week, but they've had some limitations with the equipment they have on hand. And they've left me little notes in their True Coach saying, hey, coach, this didn't quite work, but I did this instead. And it felt really good. And it's just a really nice moment as a coach to see that come out for clients. So it's a cool journey and a learning experience for all of us.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I think that's a great point as well with, giving the client the opportunity to be creative inside of their own brains. Right. And I know that, myself over the past week, I've prescribed specific exercises and I've said, add some external load, get creative with whatever feels good, right? And you have to say that with the right client that is capable of understanding what you mean by that. But yeah, I mean, some really good stuff has come from that. I know some other coaches that are implementing that idea with their clients, and their clients are feeling really good about it.
So this is probably a great moment for you, Carl, to get into exercise selection, what we have up on this next slide.
Yeah, I think this may be a little bit of a recap. This could have gotten really lengthy, and we could have broken down every pattern with ideas of exercises underneath it, but I just didn't want to go there today. So I just wanted to throw out some considerations. So consideration number one is just keep it really simple, right? Less may be more. This may go on for a long period of time. James is proposing 8 weeks, so I'm going to say it's going to go on for 8 weeks. So if this thing does go on for 8 weeks, it's like, don't throw everything at the wall day one, right? And because your clients are going to be doing very, very similar exercises, if they don't have equipment, be careful on overuse, like James is saying. So that's where the less is more moniker came from. And don't get too complex, right? Unless you're going from a simple to complex progression. And then assessment is always the starting point. And I know that we keep saying, just give your client what they can do, right? But that's very important in this conversation, right? Don't give someone that can't hold an FLR a one-arm push-up, right? Like you're setting them up for failure. They're going to get hurt, or they're going to feel really shitty about themselves when they're like, I couldn't get one eccentric rep, right? So assessment is always going to be the starting point and understanding what your clients are capable of doing in body weight exercise. Consider lifestyle, resources, function, and goals, right? So let's look at lifestyle and how long these sessions should be, right? If someone's slammed all day with work and they have calls back to back to back and they have kids, maybe that you shouldn't prescribe a 90-minute body weight training session for them. Consider resources, of course. We're talking about the lack of resources that our clients have right now, right? Keep that in consideration, right? When you're starting to design your training programs. And that just goes back to just keep it really simple, really, really simple. Sometimes a push-up times 5 to 10 reps with a great explanation is a perfect prescription, right? And then let's consider their function. That's relative to the assessment. And what are their goals? What are we trying to move toward? Maybe their goals aren't accomplishable during this time. Maybe we're not actually moving them closer to their goals. If someone's a competitive power lifter and all they have is a jump rope, let's have a really honest conversation where it's like, hey man, your bench isn't going to go up over this time through your exercise program. And then consider full body resistance training programs. It's going to be extremely difficult unless you have someone that's training 5 to 10 minutes a day. It's going to be extremely difficult for a beginner to go in and just do upper body push for 60 minutes, right? So consider using the entire body, right? And what are some benefits of relative strength training right now? Your clients are probably going to recover fairly quickly from these training sessions. So frequency and patterns can be pretty high, right? If your clients are training 3 or 4 days a week, they can push, pull, squat, lunge, bend, and do some core every day. So consider full body resistance and exercise selection. And I think the Q&A would be a good time to have a really good conversation on good exercises, bad exercises, quote unquote. But I didn't really want to jump into talking about what I think the best exercise selection pieces would be.
Yeah, I think some other external loads is stuff that kind of mimics some variability there for challenges. You just want to think about, as I mentioned, it's easy to do ground-based activities, right? So the pushing style, lunging style, squatting style. When you get into bending and pulling, and core, I guess, as well for isometrics, but you get into bending and pulling, you're probably going to have to get a little bit more creative because it's not just those two movements, but those movements are going to require more tension you could probably only do with your body weight. And generally the equipment is a little challenging. So you got to get like below your table to do pull-ups, or you got to get off stairs to do stuff, or you got to come up with some kind of idea for pulling. This is where bands can come in and be helpful, certainly in that situation. You can wrap a band around your neck and around your feet and just stand up and down. You do a bunch of reps at the right kind of tension. It's a good bending exercise. And the same thing for pulling activities. That could go on and on forever. And I agree, Carl, want to put it inside the chat box's conversation. I think people should just pull the principles that I've done, I don't know, maybe 1,000 different full body gymnastics only resistance circuits. And I can tell you that each time I do it, whether this was 15, 20 years ago or like last week, it's a very easy way to get a full body resistance challenge by doing it in that circuit format, as opposed to doing one movement, like you said, all by itself. So what we're saying here in best case principle and staying consistent for the next 8 weeks, we'd much rather you get outside of away from the like specific bodybuilding concept and get more around, let's just get people moving and keeping them consistently moving with challenges of all the patterns. So a way I put in the chat box, you can do that. You can do some form of pulling activity. You know, you're getting to the point where it's like, okay, muscles are working. I feel like they're getting a little tired. Stop, you know, go do some air squats, tempo to the bottom, pause, come back up quickly, tempo to the bottom, pause, do it until it's like, oh, okay, they're starting to get worked a little bit, et cetera, and go through that movement. You'll be surprised after 3 or 4 of that circuits, you got full body resistance, you got a lot of blood flow. It feels like people have done a good challenge. Then you start involving variation of those movements every second day, you got yourself a winner. There we go, we got a product right there. We just put together a product in 2 minutes we can sell for 99 cents. Hashtag FBR.
Yeah, another engagement piece on that as well, guys, right? If our clients are going through this for 8 weeks, they may get bored with seeing the same layout every single training session and very similar exercises. You know, something that James put in the chat box with the A1 through A6, maybe use that format on day 1. And then on day 2, maybe use a different looking format, and you put that in a, you know, true coach language, a circuit format where it looks like, 5 sets and we're doing this movement, we're resting this time and we're doing this movement. Just visually stimulating your clients and just making things look a little bit different could keep them more engaged. And I'm not saying that to say spend all of your time to ensure that you're keeping your clients entertained. It's not that, but there is a level of entertainment that has to come along with this. If your clients are used to going into the gym 3 to 5 times a week, and now they're just doing push-ups and sit-ups in their own brain. So just consider the way that this thing looks to your client as well.
Mark has a question right here. To avoid boredom, would you use a chipper format?
I think that's what I was discussing. So maybe I just said it, Mark, where it sounded a little different, but the circuit that I was talking about is a chipper format. So you're doing an exercise, not to complete exhaustion, but to feeling like there's some goodness in the movement, right? That allows like an auto-regulation of what someone determines is somewhat challenging, right? Because remember, I don't give a shit about people, getting stronger after 8 weeks and crushing their PR when they come back. That's the least of my worries right now. I'm also least worried about muscle gain in the interim. That's my least of worries. What I'm considering is that people get some kind of physical challenge that keeps them consistent for 8 weeks and they don't go insane. So in what I was talking about, you'd want to do the movement, rest a little, then go to the next movement. Rest a little, then go to the next movement. The classic definition of a chipper is that you're doing all these pieces back to back one time for a metabolic outcome. And you may get some metabolic outcome from what I was describing, but I was thinking all the patterns through and you go through them a couple of times. And I'm not sure if that makes sense or if it clouds the answer.
Yeah, Mark, let us know if that cleared up your question there for you. And Richard had also asked about some pulling variations, because that is a challenging one at home. James has popped some great ideas there in the chat box. Is there anything additional, Carl, you'd like to add there?
No, I mean, reverse plank variations as well for isometrics. And James just put carries as well for pulling, because that's going to challenge the scapula as well. So just pulling doesn't always have to look like pulling. Maybe think about it that way.
Yeah, remember retraction is scapular activity. So people just think about what challenges retraction. That's also needs to be included inside of it.
Because we can look at a hand release push-up done properly as a push-pull complex, right? Because if we're pushing, we get to the bottom and I release my hands behind me, I'm retracting my scapulas. And those of you that have done a lot of hand release push-ups in a session in a chipper format or something like that, it feels like you're doing a lot of pulling, right? So just thinking about ways to retract the scapula, those are pulling exercises.
Thanks,
I think
guys.
personally,
Really
I think personally, bend is the most challenging thing to do with body weight. You got to get ridiculously creative for that. And as just philosophically, for people who are interested in movement theory, it's actually very unnatural to do body weight resistance with high repetition and endurance for bending. Unnatural meaning our bodies are not put together to lie supine on the ground and raise our hips up and hold that for 90 seconds to get a great burn in our hamstrings. It feels like it's a great burn in our hamstrings, but it's completely unnatural for primal movement patterns. So that's just something to think about. Of course, I don't want to put that in everyone's head, but just remember it's just go try to lift a car. There, I said it. I'm always, if people get hurt, don't blame me, but you gotta lift shit. You gotta lift something that's heavy. So.
Yeah, just based on muscle fiber makeup, right? Like the hamstring specifically, I put it in the chat box here. Generally, they want higher loads with higher time under tension with less reps.
Any creative solutions, Carl, that you've programmed for your clients around that?
Yeah, I mean, getting creative with, utilizing if someone has a hard wood surface or something like that, especially our higher body weight clients, where you're just performing extremely long eccentric double hamstring extensions, right? Where we're in the glute bridge and we're extending our feet in front of us. And we're doing that for 6, 7, 8 seconds in eccentrics, right? So just little things like that. But, it's all relative to what our client gets a dose response out of, because we could have clients that have a very low training age that could do something that Israel is saying here, like a glute bridge march, and their hamstrings are sore for 6 days, right? So it just kind of depends on that.
So guys, keep your questions rolling in, and I'm going to ask one right now, actually, guys, and whoever wants to answer it, please do. Something that I have found challenging myself, and I know other clients have found challenging too with working out at home, is that there's no period of time where you're getting ready for it. Like, you don't have that drive to the gym, kind of move around, loosen up in the warm-up room. It's like straight from the breakfast table to my front patio, and I've got to work out. Do you guys have any suggestions around just getting people in a good headspace to work out when they are at home?
Yeah, I would say set a new routine, right? So, the preparatory period of getting in your car, driving to the gym, thinking of watching or listening to a podcast or whatever it is you do on the way to the gym. It's like, set a new routine that doesn't mimic that, because you're not going to get in your car and drive around the block, although that may be the answer for some people. But just set a new routine, right? So if you feel terrible getting up from the breakfast table and going to the garage or outside to exercise, don't do that. Set a new routine and see where, you can find a new normal for this time. Or just dance, like Austin said.
I like that suggestion, Austin. And James, this might be the moment where the world finally lets go of the warm-up. This might be what you've been waiting for.
Oh, I've been waiting for a lot of things, but just like the exercise intention stuff, I'm afraid it's not, I'm more pessimistic in that it's not going to change.
I mean, on that, because we are talking about resistance training program design at home, do you want to hit a little bit on warm-ups, whether they are appropriate or necessary for clients in this situation, especially if they're doing like body weight SBR stuff? Yeah,
I mean, not to get political on it, because it's very easy to go in that direction, and it hurts a lot of people's brains. That's why I'm careful as to how I go into it. We just got to remember, what is exercise intention for, right? I shouldn't be laughing, but we should be able to just go into the environment and do things and then leave. So this whole context of what's been inside the exercise environment has been for performance. So if you want to get in there and perform better than others, either at that or such that it carries over for you to win shit, I get it. I get it. But if you're going in there to do shit so you can live life better, what are you preparing for? So if your answer is, oh, but I'm sore and I'm tight and then you shouldn't be doing that movement, or you should be chewing your food or sleeping better or having more water or etc., so that you can go in and just do those things. So I need people to get a concept of that for warm-ups. To answer the person's question on that directly, like you said, Georgia, about just getting up and going, maybe start with this concept of like just giving them challenges that they're capable of at that minute, and then just starting, right? So now you're doing a self-assessment around what am I capable of today, right? And we got to be okay with the fact that people some days are just like, oh, I'm just going to do this today, right? And then other days, like tell you from my experiences, when I go in, I'm like, let's fucking do this. Like I'm like my brain and everything is ready, so let's just go, you know? And I also am speaking on behalf of an athlete mindset too, because when I was an athlete before or in an athlete mindset, yeah, you got to do a significant warm up because you need to get the best expression possible on that day for learning, right? And I don't want to get drowned out into the athlete versus health whole again, but that's generally where all that concept comes into, is that warm-ups are only there because we think it's supposed to be a performance paradigm inside of general health and fitness. Instead, people should be getting a better program design and doing what they're only capable of. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks for hitting on that, James. And please pop any questions in the chat box, guys, if there's anything you've been struggling with your clients over the last couple of weeks with program design, especially around resistance training. We'd love to answer them. Now, I do have a question for you guys, and that is on the client who is really goal-oriented. Like they love to see progression, they love to see, you know, retesting, and they love to see those FMEs moving upwards. Any recommendations if we're in this thing for, let's call it, you know, 16 weeks? How do you keep them engaged and let them feel like they're progressing?
I'll give one to start with. You now want to recognize that everyone sees the world differently, and you want to propose that as the starting point in the conversation. So now I would get them excited around the idea of choosing this 8-week time frame as new characteristics that you could work on, and set a day 1 and day 56. Holy shit, that's a long time. 56 day. Didn't that just seem super long when I said that? 56 days of that? My God, I don't even know what day it is. And it feels like we're only 4 days into this thing. So anyways, another 52 days where you guys set up some new plans. You know what I'm saying? So you got to let go of what the old cognitive perception was, right? We were going for this in our deadlift and we were going with it. You now have to say, we both agree right now that everything is different. Are we in agreement with that? Yeah? Okay. Let's set day 1 and day 56 objectives, and then work on what they have capable of and what you predict to be possible improvements within that program. That's what I would work on. For me, I can't stop on it because I was just going to talk about what would inspire me. You know, like if Carl was my coach, this is how he would inspire me. He would go, you know what we should do in this 8 weeks? You should try to beat the world record in as fast as possible, 100 burpees to an 8-foot touch. Do you see what I'm saying? But that would be specifically prescribed to me for this time frame, right? So now I'm not thinking about my clean and jerk fix. I'm not thinking about my deadlift fix, wherever. I'm inside of the confines of my home in my backyard with the sun and my body weight, right? So I possibly can get inspired on being a world champion way beyond what Carl could ever dream of for me doing 100 burpees in a certain time, right? And so that's what he would do to me to inspire me in that time frame.
100 burpees does not sound inspiring to me. Sorry, James.
That sounds good. I like that. I think Jim would annihilate that.
He would.
I'm going to do that today. 100 burpees for time to an 8-foot target. Jim, never go fast. Yeah, just to add to that.
Well, my time was 4:50. I did it last summer, just in case anyone's looking to tap that one.
Goal 449.99.
I think I have it on Instagram from last year. It was in my garage in Coeur d'Alene.
Did you warm up before, Daniel?
Funny enough, no. And because we're going to continue on that, I felt like my pecs were going to rip apart by the last 20 reps. Just being honest.
All right, guys. Well, looks like we haven't had any. Oh, no, there's one from Richard that I missed. He says, how are you screening your home online clients for each energy system with limited client equipment? For instance, do you have a go-to protocol for strength?
Screening your home online clients for. Sorry, I don't understand the question because it says go-to protocol for strength and then parentheses pain. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Richard, if possible?
Richard, pop us a note. Oh, glycolytic system, he says.
Oh, got it. I think that was my answer. What he was saying, testing.
Oh, got it. Okay.
If it's not, then let us know. Okay.
Sorry, was the question like an FME as a screening tool?
I am not sure. James, did you answer that one in the comments?
I don't think so.
Oh, got it. Yeah,
I'm kind of lost.
Yeah, I think I know what he's asking. I think he's asking what are some ideas on specific screens or assessments that we can utilize for the pain system or the glycolytic system. And I would assume that, Richard, I would assume that you don't have access to a bike, a rower, so on and so forth. So our answer is going to be, like, because what's really easy to say is like do 400-meter sprints as hard as possible, but just be really careful on who you give that to and if they're able to actually do that mechanically. Because the last thing you would want to do is be like, okay, yeah, we have a road, we've never really run together, but I want you to run 400s as fast as you possibly can, and they lose a hamstring or something like that. So when we're looking at more like mixed setting pain workouts, I wouldn't go there if you don't have a cyclical implement or an aerobic implement, because people aren't going to be able to move fast enough to elicit that without sprinting. But if they're able to sprint, you can do mixed setting, do some burpees, 20 burpees as fast as possible, sprint 100 meters, for example, if they're able to do that. Or you can just sprint 200s or 400s as fast as possible if they're capable of it. But outside of that, I wouldn't try to get too creative with pain work. James, do you have anything to add to that?
I just always, of course, want people to think about the intentions of it before you get into it. I love the conversation on what are prerequisites to do pain, but you know where I sit on that. People don't know where I sit on that. It's really useless, to be honest. Now, take that the right way, but it really is useless at these times. And just be careful that whenever you do pain, a lot of people forget, especially at this time, we don't want people developing behaviors that are always connected to doing pain, right? So I'll be careful on this, but I'll say it the right way. Doing pain right now is almost like giving people a full-on opportunity to eat whatever they want right now, as long as it stays within the calories. You see that? It's the same. It's like, are you willing to put up with all the behaviors that you're going to get with doing that? And with pain, it's not worth it. Because when people get locked into that pain scenario now for a couple of weeks, they need to get the cortisol drip to dampen themselves, to like zombie themselves for a couple hours. You're going to require more sugars, and then they're going to have to make it harder and harder over time to do that unconscious effort. So I don't find it under my conscience, I can't consciously prescribe pain right now or be a part of it. So be careful of doing it at all right now. Yes.
All right, guys.
Yeah,
Looks
and
like,
gain, and this would be a brain shift for people too. Think about it. When you do that resistance circuit with your body weight, it actually is gain and sustain at the same time. Just sit on that one for a bit. So whatever you want to do, that's gain and sustain over the next little while. That's fantastic.
all right, guys. Well, if there's no more questions, we will wrap it up there for today. Jim, Carl, James, is there anything you'd like to leave coaches with from this conversation?
I'd like to finish the conversation by saying I've added exactly 0 total value to this call, but I appreciated being on.
Well, we did get to reference you on the burpees.
Good. Appreciate that.
And the warm-up. 2 pieces. Warm up and burpees.
Hey, Jim, you had the most important contribution, which was office parkour.
Good point. Yep.
Yeah, I would just say, Georgia, just to end it, let us know if any of this stuff isn't hitting home with you guys, or if you're not understanding where we're coming from with this. I know it may seem like we're oversimplifying all of these points, but we're just sticking to the principles that we teach. And once you understand those, it really is fairly simple. So if you guys don't understand any of these pieces that we've talked about the past week, just feel free to shoot us an email. I know Georgia's shooting our emails and Instagram handles in the chat box.
Guys, I've also popped in links for a couple of free guides that we put out over the last 2 weeks, just to help with a lot of the questions that we are getting asked repeatedly from a bunch of different coaches. One is an at-home workout guide, which does have some good full body resistance training sessions inside of it. So if you want a little bit of inspiration, head there and download that one from our website. And then we did just yesterday launch a guide on how to remote coach successfully. So if you're right now navigating the process of taking some of your clients online for, whether it's a long term or just this interim period, then that guide should help you with some of the processes you need to know to be able to do that successfully. So guys, we will be back. We'll be back tomorrow for a conversation. We're going to be chatting on, all things nutrition, lifestyle, behavior, because that is such an important area that you guys can focus on with your clients right now and really make some positive changes. So it'll be really great to finish the week with that conversation. Looking forward to that chat tomorrow. And until then, guys, stay healthy and safe.
James, I extended on that press, by the way. It just, the video cut. Don't send it to Rip, man. I don't want to hear that shit.
Oh, I did already.
All right. See you guys.